So today's agenda, we're going to talk about EHO4All, which is formerly a health equity index. And we're really going to, this is a fast minute, 30-minute training, maybe 25 minutes, where we talk about sort of how it's calculated, the intricacies of it, so that you can then go back and hopefully improve your star ratings with better strategies. It is set to be 30 minutes. Afterwards, you can go, but if you have questions, we can add those to the end. Just to make sure if there's something you really want to discuss, I'll be available to do that. So let's next slide. Keep going. All right. So as you know, or you don't know, the Health Equity Index is replacing the reward factor for STARS 27. It is going to be calculated as an overall point value, and it's also going to be separately calculated for Part C and separately calculated for Part D. So it can have an impact on all three of those elements. This is a bonus opportunity. There is no penalty to lower performance. It's all upside. If you don't qualify, it's, but there's nothing negative, right? But unlike with the reward factor was 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4 points, which was pretty significant. And those were points that were added to the top of the score. They really made plans perform at a level from 4.5 to 5 or 4 to 4.5. It had some dramatic impacts on performance. By taking that away, putting it into Health Equity Index or the EHO4All, we're going to see plans numbers drop from this one change. And then over time, as plans expected to do better and improve and strategize, they should be more competitive in rates. Again, this is STARS 27 performance. The scores will cover performance from 2024 and this year in 2025. So there's just a short window left to perform for that category. Next slide. Yeah, so this is the whole point of Health Equity Index, EHO4All, is to focus on member groups that have sort of higher risk for poor health performance. And as of April, CMS didn't make any changes. That wouldn't mean they won't make more changes or dramatic changes in the future. But as the time being, they're intending to implement it for STARS 27. It focuses on low income status classified as dual eligible members and low income subsidy members, as well as disabled members. So those are the categories they've been as part of Health Equity Index and now part of EHO4All. One thing they noted in the April document, CMS said that they're considering still the rural versus urban category or a geographic distribution. I think this makes a lot of sense to the current administration. You're going to be seeing them direct bonuses, this kind of incentive reward, to plans that might go to areas and serve markets that are underserved. So what I could imagine is, we're seeing market contraction and expecting market contraction next year. Those are likely to hit places like rural communities, places where access is more challenging. So certainly that might be an interesting way they'll do it. We'll see how they measure it. These things will have to come through rulemaking, and they did note that they might make other changes, but that nothing to be determined or hinted at. So we'll just go along with the current regulations and go into that detail. Next slide. Yep. So the reward points are pretty significant. Now, I call this an extreme example because it's highly, highly, highly unlikely. But from an extreme standpoint, if you get the minimum points to get from your measures to get to a 4.5, which is 4.25000. By the way, STARS does everything at 6 decimal places. They don't round up to the second decimal. It's all the way back to the 6th. And I've had plans miss a star level by 0.0032 or something, like extremely small differences. So you can get points from CAI, which is something I'll talk about in next week's session. But the reward points, the maximum is 0.4. So here's an example where a plan got a 4.5, the lowest 0.45, but happens to have a lot of dual eligible members, a lot of disabled members, so they maximize their CAI, but they also max rewarded this EHO theoretically, which would have literally jumped them from a 4.5 to a 5. The same was happening for reward factor. The same could happen for this type of reward. The maximum points allocated are the same. Theoretically, when I talk about the methodology, the likelihood of values at 0.3 and 0.4 are highly unlikely. It's going to most likely be the 0.1, 0.2 maximum score, but we'll get into the methodology. Next slide. So EHO4All reward will depend on one thing. First, will you qualify? And we'll talk about how, but qualifying based on having enough members in the plan that have these social risk factors. And then the second part is you need to be generally across most of your measures in the top third of performance for members with social risk factors. So we're going to focus just on those populations, how well you do. In order to get reward, you have to do well across a lot of measures for those members. And you also have to serve enough members. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. So proportion of members is different per plan. If you can see on the right, 100% means a plan is like 100% dual eligible. So every single one of those members in the plan is classified as having a social risk factor for this index. Typical plan might have 20, 30, 40% of those members. Let's assume the middle plan has sort of one dual contract within a larger health plan. And then to the left is like an underserved, maybe they have a higher market area that's more educated, more academic, has better financial services. So they have less dual, less disabled members in that product or in that contract. And let's see how that affects them. Next slide. So CMS will rank all the plans from a plan that has 0 members with social risk factor, doesn't exist, to 100% of members with social risk factors. And they'll just rank them in order. And the top 50% of plans, the midpoint, will be the top plans that get the eligible for full reward. And then they take half of the half and they call it half the median, which I think people get confused. So I try to do a visualization of this. So then you take the bottom half of the plans, split that in half, and that middle group gets a potential reward for 0.2. And we'll talk about that again. Next slide. So what that means is, and in real terms, is those that are not eligible, and this is, I think this is a little old number, but generally, and this will change every year, 21% or less percent would not be eligible for reward. So you have to have, let's say 25, 30, 40% of your members your population to have social risk factors categories to classify for half reward. You have to be 45, 50 plus percent of enrollees to get at the 100% reward. This is going to change over time. Those indicators are reevaluated. And guess what? There are more dual SNP plans being added. There's an effort by CMS and some states to centralize dual SNPs into contracts and maybe even have individual contracts that are 100% dual. So as those increase, the percent to be in top half reward could go up. So you're competing against that challenge. One of the interesting takeaways about this is these examples I put at the bottom. Contract A has 50,000 members, but they serve 5,000 people with social risk factors in these categories, disabled and low income. But they don't qualify for the reward because only 10% of their total population has social risk factors. Contract B has 2,000 members. They serve 50% of their membership has social risk factors. They qualify for full reward. So it's kind of not fair because like contractually, a very large health plan could serve 20,000 members with social risk factors and not qualify. Meanwhile, another health plan could have 1,000 people or less and qualify. So you get the idea that the disparity is on sort of not proportionally how many members you serve, but proportionally within your membership. Next slide. So let's talk about how the reward scores are done. If you get a full reward, that's multiplied by your EHO score. So when we talk about EHO scores in a minute, whatever that score is, and the example here is the score is 0.22456. Of course, everything's in multiple decimal places. So we multiply the total eligible reward by the EHO4All score, which we have as a 2.4456. If your EHO4All was a 1, like the top score, meaning every measure was a 1, and your score is between -1, 0, and +1. If you get total score, what'll happen is you could get the full reward, but that's the only way you're going to get full reward. Otherwise, any lower EHO for score, 0.5, 0.9, 0.7, is going to be slightly less. The same with half reward. The only difference is if you're eligible for half reward, you got a 0.2 as your maximum score. and you multiply it by your EHO4All score, and you get your value that's going to be added. So what those green colors are is that's the number that gets added to the top of your score for stars. And then that's calculated separately for part C and separately for part D. Let's get to the next slide. So once again, this reward is linear, kind of interesting. Reward factor, the R factor, was like incremental. Here, for every little EHO point that you get a higher reward. So as long as you're eligible for reward, think about this. If a plan's EHO was almost zero, but slightly positive, the 0.00001, they do get a reward. It's pretty negligible. And if they just moved it teeny tiny slight more, 0.00002, they get a little bit more points. What I want you to take away from this is as you examine your simulations from CMS and your scores, realize that you may be challenged resource-wise, but maximizing your results and incremental improvements will keep improving your score. So whatever you can handle as a health plan, every little incremental effort leads to incremental improvement, will lead to more points on your score. So this is not like one guesstimate. Like if you get a higher score for this population in any one measure, your score will go up. So that's good news. Next slide. All right, so how do you get a score? How is this determined? What I want to say first and foremost is there are no new measures for this measure. It takes a subset of the current STAR measures, and then they calculate them for the social risk factor members. And it's most of the HEDIS, it's HOS, it's CAPS, it's medication adherence. It's those things that are based on member counts. Things that are out are appeals, complaints, operational measures like call center, where they can't divide the result by a specific member set, so they don't know which number applies to your social risk factor members versus your general population. Next slide. So here's a quick view. On the left side, I've explained it. It's a subset of measures and every individual measure. So for the example we're going to talk about right this moment, eye exams for diabetics. In the middle there, you see that this plan, and I have the pie chart, has 450 total members, including members with social risk factor, and they have 360 compliant with eye exam for diabetics. Their score is 80. If I ignore all the non-SRF members and I look at the members in that measure, that specific measure, how many of them have social risk factors? It's 50 here. And that means they're 20, and let's say the compliance score is 70. It's lower because it's expected to be. The point of that is that's who we're looking at. We're only looking at the members and social risk factor, but it's a subset of your total results. So what's really good about this is it's not like you're working on a new measure, you're working on the existing measure, and these members tend to underperform. So now, guess what? If you perform better on a lower performing plan, the set of members inside the same measure, if you improve your social risk factor members for the health EHO4All, I'm going to call it health equity index. It gets EHO4All doesn't always pop up. For the health equity index, and that same effect will be had on your overall score. So you will be lifting your reward factor for EHO4All, and you'll be lifting your overall star levels. So it is such a worthwhile effort to go for. One thing I'll note is I'm being simplistic because there's a blending of 2 years, which I'll explain in a minute, where 2 years worth of results are blended together, and it's pretty complicated. So we'll get to that next. Next slide. Off time. So here's really quick. So we evaluate each measure's performance. You saw with the diabetic eye exam, it was 70%. And then you're going to be compared to all the other health plans who report for that social risk factor group only. Right? And we're going to give you a value of a 1, good, top performance, 0, average performance, and a -1 for each measure. Next slide. Here's an example visually of that. What they've done is they take all the scores that year, and it's going to change every year, right? So they're going to say, okay, the top third performance for members with social risk factors. Remember, we take the total member measure and we only look at those members. Your score for each measure is divided, nationally will be divided into thirds, and the top third of plans will get a 1. If you're just below the top third, you're going to get 0 points for this measure. If you're in the bottom third, you're going to get -1. And that's really critical to understand. So each score measure gets these scores. Next slide. Keep going. All right. So here's the cut points for those thirds. There is a simulated document that Health Plan's got the last 2 years, a simulation of this data. And unfortunately, it includes the technical specs, but unfortunately, they're not public. So if you need the data, you can ask me or you ask someone at the health plan. But these are the cut points that were established that year for the measures that were reported. And of course, measures will come into the category, measures will come out. They will announce which measures are part of Health Equity Index. If a measure becomes invalid because there's not enough reported results, they will be taken out. But here's again, just like star cut points, now we have thirds to cut points simulate. So now we have to predict future Health Equity Index scores with a predicted performance of social risk factors. So work with your vendors that do dashboards and analytics. I work with plans and organizations to do the same. So happy to do that. So next slide. Okay, here's where all the scores come together. And this is an example. So they take every one of those measures that counts, and you saw the list for last year, and you either get a reportable number or not reportable. Like let's say you don't have enough responses, or it's the statistical CAP score becomes unreliable. They'll take that measure out of your scoring. And sometimes, like measure 6, a measure is taken out for all measures. So I think OMW was taken out for multiple measures, or was it a COA? Anyway, the point of that is you get a subset of the total measures for your scoring. You have to have 50% or more of the measures to count for a score. So if you don't have good denominator scores in most measures for social risk factor only, if you don't qualify for enough measures, you won't get a score and you won't get a reward. One other point from this grid is not working, left, right. So they'll give you a score that's a 2-year blended value. They will then give you, it's measure weighted. So the same weights and stars are applied here. So readmissions 3 weighted, controlling high blood pressure 3 weighted. They have triple the impact on your score. CAPS will have double the impact on your score. And they multiply that by that 1, -1, 0 score, which gets you your points. So a +1 times the 3 weighted measure is 3 points, right? It's worth a lot more. Anytime you get a negative, it brings your total score down. So it's a weighted average of all of your 1s and 0s and -1s to give you a score. Here, and that's why it falls between -1, 0, and 1. This contract gets a 0.46, which would actually be an excellent score for EHO4All. Next slide. All right, so so you know how the reward works. You now know basically the scoring system, which is the 1s and 0s that are weighted average. Now we're going to get into like, how do they take these original numbers? And here's what they're going to do is stars 27 takes your reported numbers from measurement year 24 and your reported numbers from measurement year 25, which are very distinct samples, measures, results, time periods, and they will blend the scores. Then stars 28 will take the same 2025 results and blend it with 26. So it's a rolling overlapping impact of your score. So even if you're behind for 25 and 24 for the stars, every effort you make now will help you for the next stars as well. So it's critical you dive right into the strategies. The takeaway here is you cannot wait anymore. I said this a year ago with plans. You can't wait anymore at all. You have just 4 months to have an impact on this. It's well worth the rewards that could come out of it. Next slide. So when you have 2 years performance, you might have a flat rate of 70 to 70. You may have significantly improved and you celebrate. You might have a downturn. What happens when you go down and the like? If you don't have a score from the first year, they'll take the second year. But if you don't have a score for the second, they won't take the measure, right? So there's different decisions about combining the 2-year results. Next slide. So the 2-year blending takes into effect 3 things. Your enrollment differences, basically how much proportion of members did you have in year 1 versus year 2? Are you growing significantly, shrinking significantly? That's a big deal. The other thing is national trends. Are all health plans improving or just you? right? So the more you're improving against the tide or vice versa, the challenge will be they want to adjust the score. And then the denominator size, so like how many members you have and the stability of that score. So let's go into the calculations. So they start with a weighted average, which makes sense for most things we do. So like if you have, this is an example of a plan that went from 3,000 members for the measure to 2,000 members. Remember, everything's at the measure level. And they had a drop in members, but they had an improvement. So a weighted average gives credit to the value based on the denominator size, based on 3,000. So because they have more members in year one versus year two, the value of that 70 is actually bigger than the value of the 75. So your score would, on a weighted average, would be 72. Okay. Now let's get into the more complex. It gets even more complex. I don't want you to worry about logarithmic formulas. I keep showing these to people and I don't want to confuse you, but I want you to understand that this math is in the simulation. Your team can replicate it in an Excel spreadsheet or whatever you want to do. You can replicate this analytically, but I want you to understand what the three inputs are into the formula. The first input is the blended score we talked about. So that was the weighted average that came out to 72. So it's basically taking into effect what is your blended value for the 2 years. But then B is the log odds coefficient, which just represents how much nationally it's growing or shrinking. And then C is the proportion of members. Nationally is the performance improvement. So whether nationally plans are improving or they're dropping in scores. So how well everyone did. And then C is how many members you have in year one versus year two. So if you've shrunk a lot, that's going to make a huge difference in your plan scores. Next slide. Okay, so I just want to re-examine the log, what that first middle one was, this whole national trend. So the whole point of this calculation and evaluation is to not give too much, because they're blending 2 years. If you improve, they want to recognize, they don't want to like give too much, or let's say you shrunk plans members, they want to presume that your performance in year one matches your performance in year two. So it's like if you did a CAP survey, it's like you surveyed all those members, even though sometimes they're the same people, all in year two. So the math formula is to equate the 2 years based on performance nationally and your change in your membership. But that coefficient is to sort of realign so that it basically makes 2 years into one, theoretically. Okay, next slide. I don't want to, like, one thing, these coefficients are in a table in the simulated report that the health plans received. A positive number means nationally people are going up. There's an adjustment for that. Plans get boosted for that because let's say your scores from last year were lower. That'll be an effect. Then the negative coefficient is the reverse, plans are dropping, and then that's applied to the score. Next slide. So here's an example. I didn't really want to have, we're taking an hour to go through all the formulas and variations of these themes, but I want you to get a takeaway on this. So here's back to the example that got a 72 weighted score, right? So if you took 70% year one, 75% year two, and took the factor in how much percentage of members they had in each year, the plan's member score was 72. But now you add the factor of just looking at membership change, 3,000 to 2,000, and now the fact that the plans nationally improve, they gave you a 0.376. So they actually bumped the plan up to 72.46. And what's great about this, so like that coefficient says nationally everyone improve. So remember, this plan did worse in the first year, and we're trying to equate the 2 years. So because the improvement happened, it's presuming the first year's number was actually a little higher. So they're giving mathematically the increase in year one, if they're in your head, right? So that you're getting a better score. This doesn't always happen. It can go down and it can happen in the opposite score. So that's example where all those different coefficients have, all those different variables come together, and it's adjusting your two-year blended. The reason this is important is you got to do the math on this and understand what's happening at your health plan, because it's not so obvious. And it's not a simple average. It's not a simple weighted average. It's a complex logarithmic number, right? So I did do the remath on the example. And so if you take the same example, but you grow the membership, instead of shrinking, grew, your final number wouldn't be 0.7246, it would be 0.735, right? And it's the same performance each year. And then if national, let's say your performance was the same, you shrunk your members from 3,000 to 2,000, your score went from 70 to 75, improvement, presume the national scores went down, you'd end up with a 71.5, which is worse than your weighted average, right? So if everyone else went down, they're actually going to lower your score overall. So this is what gets confusing, right? You got to predict how everyone else is doing, how well you're doing. You have to interplay your changes from year to year on membership growth, not just, hey, I need to reach a 75. You also have to look at these other variables. How well did I do last year? Is my population growing or shrinking? What do I presume nationally is going to happen in these measures? That's a lot. Next slide. Sorry about going over at 7:30 of the 2:30 the tech notes, technology problems. Here's a couple scenarios. Like I said, it would take an hour to go through all the details and variations of themes, but there's going to be an improvement surprise. So the most common problem is going to be plans are expecting this grand improvement from year to year, but because of national changes, it might be tempered. The other thing is hardest to control. You might get penalized by if the industry goes down and you went up, actually scores might go down. Not fully down, but like adjusted down. So these factors affect how well you think you can get to a threshold for those thirds. And then, what you have for year one and growth in year two makes an effect. So what I want you to take away is not like every example, because there's multiple variables. What I want you to understand is you have to calculate this. You have to not just calculate 1 year's worth of data, you have to calculate 2 years of the data. And then you need to then use those calculations to better understand where you actually have to perform, not in 1 year over 2 years, and what the implications of all that will be. So if leadership comes and says, we're dropping our DSNP in that contract area, or we're only going to have 1 DSNP instead of 2, or whatever, like, you got to then say, whoa, that's going to affect my HEI or EHO4All reward. I need to recalculate it, right? It's not just quality performance. It's also these intricacies of math that have to be then applied to what you do for your strategy. I'll try to rush through the next. Strategy, right? So we probably need an hour. I mean, a lot of this is training on understanding the underlying principles. Take away what you can so that you can then apply your analytics. But I do want to mention a few things before I end the call. You need to identify your social risk factor members. So if you have dashboards that track your stars, there should be a subheader for each measure and what the actual score is for those just social risk factor members. I hate to call them social risk factor members, but it's just a simplified term. For low income and disabled members, right? And then recompute those measures, those have their own goals, separate from your overall measure, separate from your QI measure goals. I mean, your dashboards need to be better. They need to be intricate. They need to have these kinds of calculations. So you don't have to think about it, that they're built in. So build better dashboards, monitor eligibility changes month to month, year to year, understand what the implications will be when you talk to sales, talk to your leadership about what's going to be happening in 2026. Like, are we going to grow? Are we going to shrink? How might that affect my planned expectations for scores? If you're going to consolidate, there's a whole level of work to do with consolidations. And then, hey, let's keep our eye on national trends as much as we can, use our HEDIS vendors and other vendors to sort of get better insights on how we can expect the industry to perform. Next slide. Improving your scores. I could talk about this for 2-3 hours if you want me to join your plan sometime. Because I worked at a Medicaid plans for many years. I led Medicaid division of United Healthcare's HEDIS reporting and all the different state issues with that. These members are very similar. You cannot just do more outreach. I keep hearing that. It's like, well, we're just going to invest in calling the members more. No, you have to figure out and analyze what are the barriers to why these people get service. Please don't assume them. Use QI analysis to do that. Like, what are driving your members' challenges? And it could be very different for disabled members than low income. It can be different geographically. Things like, obviously, classic issues around transportation or something, language, culture, these are all different factors that are not tied in the measure, but affecting these members' experience. I don't want you to forget about network adequacy. I would really start with there and make sure you have the right amount of members, doctors available for appointments, not just in your network, for in the geographic areas those members reside. Make sure they have correct access and availability to the service. You need to train your staff on helping these members. We need to identify community resources, referral programs, expand and change your benefits to better serve what they do. We've done that for years for medications. Why not for social risk factors? And your community partnerships, the classic thing that Medicaid health plans do. If you're a classic Medicare plan, you might need to think differently about your communities, your services, what's available to members. It's beyond the doctor. Okay, next slide. And finally, if you don't qualify, this is a whole other meeting discussion, but I would say first and foremost, there's a lot of plans saying, well, we're thinking about trying to pursue membership of that type. There's going to be risks and rewards. There are a lot of rewards for points, but you tend to underperform in these populations. And if you have no experience treating disabled dual members on a high volume basis, you actually might underperform overall in your stars. So be aware that one reward might come out with a negative result elsewhere. So definitely do lots of analysis. But if you're not going to pursue it and you don't qualify, really, you're going to have to maximize all your other points. If you were one of those high performing plans, got the reward factor every year, you're going to lose those points. QI is the #1 area where there's a lot of points available. Statistical improvements for the QI measure are sometimes easier than cut point divisions. So maybe map out a strategy for QI points and what that 10 weighted point system would look like for your overall score. I've rushed through the strategy. There's a lot to talk about. I hope that was helpful. And appreciate for those who've stayed 8 minutes longer. I didn't intend to take that long. If you have questions, please direct them to me. I really hope that you'll sign up for the next session or watch the videos for the prior, pick what topic works for you. I will stay on for a few minutes for questions and discussion, but if you got what you needed, I wish you well and hope to see you next week. All right.